Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. My first time in Blacksburg, although I've been to the Alexandria campus many times with Susan. As Susan mentioned, I am not an architect. I'm not a planner. I'm not a landscape architect. I am an educator. And I thought it'd be helpful to kick off the program of sharing just a little bit about how I came to build a bridge, because this was so not part of my career path at all. In my role as the Vice President for Education, we brought over the planner Jan Gale to speak at the Building Museum, and many of you might know Jan's work of how do we build cities for people, right, not cars. Jan has done amazing work. And Jan had never met our, at the time, director of the Office of Planning for the District of Columbia, a good friend of mine named Harriet Tregoning. And so I organized a breakfast with the three of us, and Jan was running a little late, and Harriet and I were catching up, and I asked what I thought was a completely innocent question. And beware of innocent questions throughout your career, because that innocent question was, hey, Harriet, what's all of this noise? What's all the plans for this 11th Street Bridge? They had taken down, they were in the process of taking down an old freeway and putting up a new one. And Harriet looked across the breakfast table and said, it's interesting you asked that question, Scott, because I have this thought bubble of an idea to use this unique point in time when the old bridges are coming down, new bridges are coming up, to save part of the old bridge and transform it into a park. But everyone on her staff thought she was bananas, and she needed some help. And she asked me, what do you think? Could I help? And it was 7:30 in the morning, and I clearly hadn't had enough caffeine, and thought, how hard can this be? 13 years later, we're finally breaking ground later this summer. But the more I looked at it, the more I couldn't think of many other projects in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., that in a single intervention we could improve the community's physical, economic, environmental, and social health. So I was hooked. I volunteered for 2 years, working at the Building Museum during the day, and the nights and weekends going out and talking to the community, which I'll talk more about in a minute, and then left to take this on in early 2014. But before I launch into the Bridge Park, a little about Building Bridges Across the River. It's our larger nonprofit. We are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, and we focus on 3 core areas: east of the river in Washington, D.C., east of the Anacostia River in Ward 8, focusing on arts and culture, economic opportunity, health and well-being. And we do that through 5 signature projects. We have created the Town Hall Education, Arts and Recreation Campus. It's called the ARC. It is the largest collaboration of social sector nonprofits of its kind in the country. We have 14, soon to be 15 nonprofits that are all co-located on a big 16-acre campus. Next time you're in DC, please come visit us. It's an amazing place. We have the largest theater east of the river. We run a network of 7 urban farms for a community that has only 1 full-service grocery store serving 75,000 residents. We run the Skyland Workforce Center, which I'll touch on in a minute. But the largest project that is in our history has been the 11th Street Bridge Park that it's been my honor to lead since the beginning. So I have 3 themes that I'm going to sort of weave in throughout this presentation. One is don't shy away from really hard things. I remember early on in a conversation I was having with Harriet when I was still volunteering, that I was just sharing with Jim, that it was bright and early one morning, and we were meeting down in the Building Museum, and I was strategizing about something, I forget exactly what, with the Bridge Park, and I said, Harriet, you know the one thing that could kill this project? And she stopped me and said, one thing? There's 100 things that could kill this project. And I was like, all right, but can we just focus on this one thing for a minute? But we've gone through the rest of the 99 things now, right? When you're transforming an old federal highway that's been aged out over a navigable channel in the nation's capital, wedged between the National Park Service and an active Department of Defense installation. There's a lot of chefs in the kitchen, right? So a lot of folks that could say no, but we've been building those partners, we've been building those allies. The other to think about, and this is where the Bridge Park really took a turn and has become so much more than a park, is a quote that from my dad. He told me often as I was growing up, if you think about the consequence of your actions before you take whatever that action is, like if you think about it really deeply, you'll know which direction you're gonna go, right? And so you need to be thinking deeply about what are the intended actions and what are the unintended actions of whatever that task is that you're working on. And then finally, and this is really built into the DNA of building bridges, we are not doing this by ourselves. We are doing this with dozens and dozens and dozens of partners. We are doing this with over 10,000 residents that we've met with, right? We are doing this, we are so much stronger for working together. So, as we think about this project, increasingly, I've been thinking about the 11th Street Bridge Park as a project that can repair, a project that can heal, and talking about unintended consequences, 70 years ago, the Washington, D.C., like many cities, went on a big freeway building binge. In Washington, D.C. and Southeast D.C., we have the Anacostia River that for a long time has divided the community by race, by income, by even life expectancy. There's a 15-year life expectancy difference depending on where you grew up in the district. Think about that for a minute. 15-year life expectancy, right? I would argue, and I think you would agree, that our life expectancy should not depend on our zip code, right, that we grew up. But then we made it even more complicated where we built not one but two freeways that line the Anacostia River. So there's this enormous physical, metaphorical, and sort of real barriers dividing the city. And these freeways did not pop up out of nowhere, right? This is a picture of the 695 freeway. I love/hate this picture because you can see this like 8 lanes of concrete mess, and there's those young men who are like crossing over. What an incredibly pedestrian, not friendly experience that is, right? And this freeway, when it was built in the 1960s, ended up displacing thousands of residents, right? Over 2,000 homes, 61% were African American, that were just obliterated, right? Through eminent domain, they had to be scattered with the wind. So again, thinking about those unintended consequences of building this infrastructure. And this is personal because that little red dot, that's where my wife and I live. We're on the corner of 9th and I Southeast. So, I'm only about 4 blocks away from where the bridge park will be. So this is my neighborhood too. And those freeways and the river have had, since they've divided the city, have had enormous downstream consequences. If you look at the Anacostia River, it's only 900 feet wide, but there's nearly a $500,000 delta between homes on one side of the river and the other, right? Separated by 900 feet of water. There is on west of the river, in my neighborhood, half the residents own their homes. East of the river, 75% of residents are renters, right? So there's these enormous economic and social barriers that or impacts that these freeways and a divided city have made. And that includes these downstream health impacts as well. East of the river has a 41.9% adult obesity rate, most likely because of that lack of access to find a place for full service grocery stores. I was corrected the other day, it's not a food desert, it's a food swamp, right? Food exists, but they're corner stores, right, that are selling not sort of the healthiest food that's out there. So our job, as we're thinking, our sort of very large job is how do we start repairing some of these damages? How do we start healing the neighborhood, and how do we create a new piece of civic infrastructure out of what once carried cars and tractor trailers? And I think that's the goal that most viscerally has connected the local residents from the beginning of how do we create this place where we can bring together people who otherwise might not cross paths, right? And I would posit that in these times, certainly that we're in now, we need more places where we can bring together an entire city, right? So where the bridge is just point of reference, the RFK, or what was RFK, is at the top corner. On the other side is National Stadium. And we had these old freeways that were built between 1963 and 1967. This is what the old freeway bridges used to look like that reached the end of their lifespan. And it was Harriet's sort of concept that the kernel of an idea to, instead of getting rid of all of the old infrastructure, could we save some of that infrastructure to build something new, to build something that was driven by local residents. At the time, the High Line had just opened up in New York, so city planners across the country were thinking about how to think differently about infrastructure. And we tried to see if we could save the entire old bridge. I thought there was a beautiful industrial patina to that sort of green deck. Most people thought it was really hideous and ugly. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But it turned out that it would have been cost prohibitive to keep the deck. There's a reason why this bridge was being replaced. I've learned more about engineering than I ever thought I would want to know working on this project. But the piers were in good shape. So we're able to keep the old piers, and then we're going to build a new deck that's on top, but one that no longer holds cars or tractor trailers, but holds community-driven the programming spaces, a new civic space. So the 4 projects that have been really animating the project from the beginning, these are the 4 table legs that have been holding up the entire project, is how do we make sure that this is not just an anchor for development as we have in the past, but how are we thinking about this as inclusive growth? And I'll be talking more about that later in the program. 2, as I mentioned, those health the impacts. How do we actively work to build a healthier community? Reconnecting the 2 sides of the community, 2 sides of the city that have long been divided. And finally, how do we engage residents with the Anacostia River and improve the environment itself? The Anacostia River is a fascinating side story. Once one of the most polluted rivers in the nation, and there are plans now to have the Anacostia swimmable and fishable in the next couple of years, which is really remarkable. I kayak pretty regularly on the Anacostia River, and when you're out there kayaking, you see great blue herons, you see the occasional bald eagle. I even saw, when I was paddling a few years ago, what I thought was the largest rat that I've ever seen before in my life, until I saw its tail and I saw it was a beaver. So there's a healthy beaver population that's come back to the Anacostia River. And the thing that I've become totally fascinated by is the river otter has come back to the Anacostia River. Forgive the pun. A friend of mine who runs the Anacostia Watershed Society just posted this on his social media, and this is a huge indicator of bringing back the health of the river. The subaquatic vegetation's come back. It's really fascinating. But to get people to really care about the river, you need to bring them down to it, and you need to get them beyond those 2 freeways that I mentioned. So sometimes when these big sort of infrastructure projects happen, the time the community becomes engaged is when there's renderings, right, and big fancy drawings. And at that point, oftentimes the cake is already 90% baked, right? And we needed this to be more than just what color should the chairs be, right? We really needed to start from the beginning. And even before we got to the design, we needed to ask the community of, should we even do this? In essence, sort of ask for permission. The community east of the river is 91% African American, and people who look just like me have been coming in this community again and again and making an awful lot of promises that for a variety of reasons have not been fulfilled, right? So we needed to take several steps back and go and build trust in the community. And those first 2 years when I was volunteering, we had over 200 meetings with the community. We've had over 1,000 meetings so far to date. We stopped counting after 1,000. But just sitting around kitchen tables, sitting around office spaces, sitting in church basements saying, what do you think? Is this a good idea, bad idea? I even took 2 weeks off from my day job at the Building Museum, where we worked with local youth, the teenagers, about 2-3 dozen teenagers, and I called every favor in that I could to bring in architects and engineers and planners and landscape architects to work with these youth. And the goal was, and this was before we did our design competition, to ask the youth, ask the users of what should this park look like? What should it be, right? Hardest 2 weeks of vacation I've ever worked before in my life. I thought the first week I came home to my wife and was like, this is a disaster. And then the second week, beginning of the second week, I remember this like yesterday. There were two young women, Felicia and Daisha, and I was asking what they were working on. And they were like, well, Mr. Scott, you said that one of the goals is like re-engaging residents with the river. And I was like, oh my God, they actually listened to what I was saying and things were coming in. And so we want to, they design sort of access points to the river and these overlooks, because they are ultimately the ones who are going to be using this park. They should be the ones that playing an active role in helping design it. And as much as we could as we went through, we tried to remove as many barriers as we could between the residents, right, the users of this park. So we didn't ask for them to come to one more meeting. We went to regular meetings where the community was already showing up. We provided food and childcare. We didn't do this then, but we certainly do this now. If we're asking for regular support and feedback from the community, we pay them, right? I would never ask a consultant to come down from New York and work for free, but oftentimes that's what we ask of the community all the time, right? So we need to compensate them. And we need to make sure that the number of meetings that people have been to and nothing happens, right? We needed to make sure we were demonstrating results. We were demonstrating that their words, their thoughts, right, their dreams, had an impact in shaping the project. So when we, after we sort of got buy-in, certainly there was some skepticism, but we said, all right, well then, if we're gonna move forward, like what should be on this park? And we heard all these ideas that we baked into the design competition. We had big design charrettes on both sides of the river to make sure we weren't missing something. We prioritized all of the ideas, what was most important. The most important idea, the programming space was an amphitheater, a space to really celebrate the history, arts, and culture of the community. And then we launched an international design competition. We had 81 firms from around the globe, some of the best designers on the planet participate. And it was, I'd never run a design competition before. There's a lot of firsts as I've worked on this project. But as I looked at other design competitions, I saw that many, not all, but many, there was no connection of the client to the designers, more or less the community, and that didn't make any sense to us. So we created something that we called a design oversight committee, comprised of 36 stakeholders. And their role was really to, from the beginning, they reviewed the design brief before a design team saw it, made some significant changes. They met with our 4 final design teams again and again as part of an iterative process to make the project better. And at the end of 8 months, they selected the design team. They made a formal recommendation to the jury, and the jury would have had to have some serious reasons to overrule the community. And I think what's important is to pause here in a second and really call out that as much as we can, we're trying to put the decision-making power, the agency, right, in the hands of local residents. I didn't get to vote, right? So the community voted, and whatever the community voted on, I was gonna have to go out and raise tens of millions of dollars, a moment of high drama, right, certainly for me. But the design that they chose and the design that both our design oversight committee and our jury was unanimous for was the design by architecture firm of OMA and the landscape architecture firm of Olin. And it was this really sort of simple but elegant design, reusing the old piers across the river to build this double-decked sort of 2 trusses that come together. It almost doubles the occupiable space, making way in a really brilliant way the programming that the community requested from the beginning. So I'm going to take you on a little walk across the bridge. Starting on the Navy Yard side, we're capturing 100% of the stormwater, right? If one of our goals is to re-engage residents of the river, we need to practice what we preach. So there's a giant 30,000 gallon cistern on one side of the river, 25,000 gallon cistern on the other that we're going to reuse for irrigation. Where the trusses come up, you get high enough, 65 feet, and in the height limited the city, you get these remarkable views of the US Capitol building and the hills of Anacostia. We have a center plaza that we call Anaquash Plaza for the original Native American inhabitants that made this their home for thousands of years. This is a place of gathering, a place of coming together, farmers markets, bands, and the like. We have a hammock grove, a place of not only physical well-being, but mental relaxation. A couple of years ago, I had a big art competition, and we've hired these 3 remarkable women who are designing the hammocks. Each of the different hammocks will be inspired by different leaders in the community. They're in that community engagement process, identifying those leaders right now. A cafe and community meeting space in the center of the bridge. A community front porch a place that is covered by the green roof that is on top, but medium programming space. the great lawn that is on top that, that in essence is a green roof that's over the cafe and community meeting room. And my favorite space, if I'm allowed favorite spaces on the park, are Mussel Beach Play Space, not mussel, but M-U-S-S-E-L, named after the native bivalves that are helping to clean up the Anacostia River. Our partners at the Anacostia Watershed Society have introduced over 60,000 native mussels to the river, to the Anacostia. They're helping pull toxins out of the river and help reoxygenate the water and make it swimmable and fishable again and bring back one of the reasons why those otters are coming back. And then anchoring the east side of the river will be an environmental education center, really important to the community, that can tour local school groups and inspire the next generation of river stewards. This will be run by the Anacostia Watershed Society, who will also be getting folks out on the river and having those experiences going up and down the Anacostia. Urban agriculture, we'll have our 8th urban farm that'll be on site. And the river amphitheater that has these just dramatic views of the Anacostia River that will seat 250 people. We think we can get about 1,100 people in through some different configurations, so a significant size outdoor amphitheater. So all told, it's about 7.5 acres of space. I'm very happy to report that 2 weeks ago, we received our construction permit from the DC Department of Buildings. It only took 3 years. Big deal for us, which means that we should solicit our general contractor next month in March and break ground over the summer. We invite you to come up to DC for, this is gonna be beyond a golden shovel moment. In the fall, if those in the audience know what go-go music is, go-go music is the music of DC, our official music of DC. We commissioned our own go-go song. So if you Google Take It to the Bridge by Raheem Devon, I'm a little biased, but it's an amazing song. Raheem will be playing there. It's gonna be a huge event, which we're really looking forward to. And then we anticipate the park opening up in the second half of 2028. And all this is about sort of reconnecting communities, right? How do we sort of connect a larger constellation of activities up and down the Anacostia River? But as we think about, again, the intended and unintended consequences that I mentioned, early on in the project, we hired in a big firm out of New York, HR&A advisors, who do an economic impact analysis to sort of justify building the park. And a stat came back in that report that I remember really popped out at me is that projects like this can increase property values nearby anywhere from 15 to 25%, or in the Highlines case, 103%, right? And suddenly I was thinking, wait, all those people that helped shape the park, what happens if we unintentionally displace them, right? And I thought there's got to be another way to do this. So right after the design competition in 2014, we sat down with a number of local partners in the city. They had years worth of meetings with hundreds and hundreds of individuals and nonprofits to identify with the idea if we could identify interventions, investments really early before the park even opens, do so with this level of intentionality, and most importantly, put the community at the center of that process, perhaps we can have a rising tide that lifts all boats, right? And can address some of these issues. We, again, are not doing this work by ourselves. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of nonprofits that are helping with us. And we launched our first community preservation plan in December 2015. And I'm not going to go through all 34 strategies with you tonight, but I'm going to mention just a few. For the last 10 years, we've been running a home buyers club in collaboration with another housing nonprofit named Mana, where we've helped 202 renters east of the river become homeowners, capturing intergenerational wealth. We're now offering down payment assistance and closing cost assistance, cash grants to help them along their journey, which can be enormous barriers for home ownership. We've stood up a community land trust, the Douglas Community Land Trust, that now has over 260 units of permanently affordable housing. And we not only stood up this separate nonprofit and did a lot of public education about this, we also raised millions of dollars for early property acquisition to get them on their way. if we're spending $92 million on this park, we want to make sure that as much of these dollars go in the local community as possible. So we just graduated last Friday our 43rd construction training program, where we've placed over 500 East of the River residents into construction jobs. So this spring, if the GC comes to me and says, well, Scott, I can't find any local residents to hire, I can say, well, here's a list of 500 people that we've trained and helped get jobs in the construction industry. So try again and try a little harder, right? We're going to help you along the way. And if we're getting anywhere between 800,000 to 1.2 million visitors a year annually to the park, which is I think, a conservative estimate, let's call it 1 million people, that's a lot of people that can support small businesses on either side. But again, how do we strengthen those small businesses now, well in advance of the park opening up? So we've kicked off, we're just about to launch our 4th cohort of a program where we've partnered with a big consulting firm, Booz Allen, that every year we work with 10 East of the River small business owners that are on the 2 main commercial corridors where the park lands, on Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue and Marion Barry Jr. Avenue. And we give these, each of these businesses a whole team of their own personal consultants at no charge. And each of those businesses then also receives cash grants of $8,000 to help implement whatever it is that they need, a marketing strategy, purchase a new back of house, the financial system, like again, whatever it might be. The impact has been huge. Booz Allen, one of the things that Booz Allen heard was a real challenge of these small business owners to apply for federal or local grants. And so they created their own grant writing team to evaluate and help them write grants. Last year, through grants alone that their coaches helped them with, these 7 businesses and 3 nonprofits in last year's cohort brought in $1.1 million in grants, right? Including the new Go-Go Museum that opened up just last year and just last week celebrated their 1-year anniversary. And we even commissioned, we work with a local design firm, River East Design Center, to create these mobile kiosks that eventually will migrate up to the park. But each month houses a different nonprofit or different small business owner and entrepreneur that you can find at Eastern Market, at DuPont Circle, at the downtown Holiday Market. So we can build the capacity now, right? Build this stronger muscle. So we're not waiting when the park opens and saying, okay, we're ready, small businesses, anybody? Hello, right? We're building, we're making these investments now and doing so with intentionality. And our first part of this too is we've been learning as we've been going through. Our first community preservation plan focused on small businesses and workforce and housing, but we left something out that we went back and corrected. We could get all those right, but if we lose what makes East of the River neighborhood Anacostia unique and special, that will have enormous downstream consequences. So we went back and we added in arts and culture strategies to make sure that we are elevating, we're amplifying the voices of local residents. And the biggest way that we do that, and you're all invited on May 16th to come up to DC. We have a huge Anacostia River Festival that we produce that brings 10,000 people down to the banks of the Anacostia River. And for us, who will be running the park, it's a fantastic way for us to test and pilot what kind of programming the community really responds to well in advance of the park opening up. So, and learning that well, but before we start pouring concrete is really important. And finally, we've added in, just recently in the last 2 years, new health and wellness strategies, really addressing those health goals that I mentioned earlier, that include standing up Bridge Park plots. So we've been working with communities of faith and nonprofits east of the river to stand up the farms, and these farms, we harvest all the food at the farms, and we set up a big farmers market at our main campus at the Arc, but we remove the barrier of cost. So it's all free, and last year we served 4,000 families, particularly last fall when the government was shutting down and SNAP benefits were paused. You know, we were seeing pretty regularly 120, 150 families, and then it jumped to 500, 750, almost 800 families per week, and we were able to secure enough funds to actually meet those needs. And last fall, we gave out the oddly specific number of 1,555 turkeys and all the fixins to bring a little joy in that holiday season. And these plots aren't just these farming spaces. We've commissioned works of art for each of these spaces. The image on your left is our first farm at the DC Housing Authority called Hopkins Farms. And the other image on your right is at National Children's Center. It's an amazing school that works with kids with developmental disabilities at 0 to 5. And the farm they've named Baby Bloomers Farm. And what you see in those images are baby bloomers written in American Sign Language. It's the most amazing farm. It's phenomenal. They use it as a teaching space for other little ones. And then at the end of every season, we have a huge festival called our Taste of the Harvest Festival, where we invite the community to come. And last fall, we had 700 people come and sit down and have a dinner with us, a sit-down dinner with the community that we literally broke bread together, right? So again, it's taking that concept of bringing together people on the bridge, even before it opens, to come together and have a moment together. And we end the night with roasting s'mores under the stars. It's a really sort of lovely event. And then finally, in sort of the health category, a new program that we just kicked off last year, or 2 years ago, excuse me. I was at a lecture by American Forests that had a statistic that really blew me away, that east of the river was on average 13 degrees warmer than other parts of the city, and an older housing stock that often doesn't have access, doesn't have HVAC, that can be deadly, and particularly for those who might have asthma or heart disease, that can be a huge issue. So we tried to see what we could do about that, and we did a whole bunch of research, and we've handed out over 100 high energy efficient air conditioning units. And the image right there of Mr. Wren, we got the sweetest note from Mr. Wren in this very first year pilot. He has narcolepsy and a really hard time going to sleep, and he wrote this note after a week of having this air conditioning unit that said, Scott, this was one of my first good nights of sleep since I can't remember when. Right? So it's these little things, these little investments, and hearing from the community what the needs are and seeing where we can step up. And finally, during the pandemic, we were deeply concerned that our community that we serve in Ward 8 was going to be disproportionately impacted by COVID. That unfortunately came to pass. So we tried to see what we could do to address this. We ended up partnering with 3 amazing other nonprofits, Martha's Table, Bread for the City, and Far Southeast Family Strengthening Collaborative, which turned out to be a program that was the largest privately funded unconditional cash transfer program that's ever been attempted in the United States. So we distributed $5,500 in cash. We raised $4.1 million from private sources for over 650 families. We connected them to navigators, got dry goods. It was phenomenal, all evaluated by a third party from the Urban Institute. And what does an unconditional cash transfer program have to do with building a bridge, right? On its face, absolutely nothing, right? But it means everything, right? Because it's widening the aperture of this project, widening the sort of needs of the community, and doing that really careful listening of what is it that the community needs. And by doing that, we build trust with the community and really share the answer to 2 important questions that we hear all the time, who is this project really for and who can benefit from it, right? We're demonstrating that well in advance before a shovel even hits the ground. So to date, we've invested $104 million in these community preservation strategies. This is totally separate from the $94 million that's going to cost to build the park. And we're now advising about a dozen similar projects around the country. We're advising an enormous, ambitious freeway removal project in Detroit, project in Baltimore, in Philadelphia, in Mississippi, in Cleveland, Tennessee, because we shouldn't all be making the same mistakes at the same time across the country, right? And B, we're the nation's capital. We should be the place when we get things right, we can share some of those lessons learned, and seeing this work just ripple out across the country from coast to coast. So to wrap up, not wincing when you can when these hard and wicked problems present themselves, right? I was cleaning my office the other day and I saw a Gantt chart for when the park would open, and like, I had construction starting in like 2017 or something, and the park was already going to be open, and like, kind of had to laugh to myself. I did not think this would be 13 years of my life, right? But it enabled us to be thinking much more broadly about this park that's become an important part of the project, by thinking about the consequences of building this park, right? And finally, and I think this is important for all of us right now and forever, right, that we are stronger together. We are more impactful when we work together, and we can leverage our individual assets for a much bigger impact in the community. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I think we might have time for some questions too. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you for an amazing talk. I have lots of questions.
Please.
The one I want to ask first is, it's so impressive all the things that are going along with the design. To use architects, planners, to think about this building something, but all the other programming. So I'm curious, once the construction is done, which I know is not a small thing, are there plans, will this be continuing on as a project, as an initiative? And I guess as a small subset, is this part of city government, or is this what exactly is the government structure of that? Which the two questions are kind of connected.
Yeah, I'll start with the second. Great question, thank you. I'll start with the second question first. This is a larger collaboration with the city. So again, it started with the DC Office of Planning. It has since moved to the District Department of Transportation. So they are our partner. We're the nonprofit. They're our city partner. The city has put in half of the funding, and then we've put in the other half through some federal grants, competitive federal grants, and lots of philanthropy, individuals, community foundations, and the like. When the park is open, the city will own the asset, but we, Building Bridges Across the River, will run and manage it for the next 99 years. They wanted to be in perpetuity, but anyways, 99 years is good enough, right? And that's the lifetime of the project. And the city will be responsible for all of the infrastructure. So the city will be responsible for the piers, the pilings, everything up to the deck, and then we will be responsible, and we want to be responsible for everything from above the deck. So programming, lighting, the landscaping. There's 145 native trees that are going to be on the park, right? We're working with Casey Trees to donate all those trees. We need to prune those and all of that, right? And that's the critical, because I was sharing with Susan earlier, last fall, we have a big town hall every year where we give an update on the project, and we're just about to go out to bid, and it's very exciting, and a community member came up and said, Scott, you must be so excited, like it must be like the marathon's almost over, and it's like, first of all, this is an Ironman, and like, I'm swimming back to shore, and I can see the shore, but then we got to build the thing, and then we get to run the thing, right? And the first part of your question comes up in our public meetings all the time, like, we're gonna have a park to run then, right? So then it becomes a larger platform that we can continue this work. So much so that we are actually in the process right now of raising a $10 million, what we're calling a housing opportunity fund. That will provide down payment assistance for 5-year the forgivable loans. They're really grants, but working again with MANA, we've already raised about $2 million out of this larger work, as well as $5 million for additional property acquisition for the Douglas Community Land Trust. Because it hit me 2 falls ago, we got a big $15 million land and water conservation grant from the Department of Interior. And completed our capital campaign, and you had to pry me off the ceiling. I was like, oh my God, this is finally done. And then it really hit me. I was like, whoa, we're going to be under construction soon, and there's going to be like rife with even more speculation on the east of the river. So that's how we came up with this idea of it's time to really triple down on some of the housing strategies. So all of that work will continue. It might change, right? So instead of doing construction training, there's going to be 40 to 50 people working on the park, right? These are full-time jobs. Like it might transition transition into that. A lot of our arts and culture programming might shift, because then we'll be programming the amphitheater and sort of everything else. But our commitment to the community is that all of the and continued investment, will continue, forever. So, yeah, good question. Thank you.
Since I'm close.
Yeah, please.
Thank you for the presentation. It's a beautiful project. Can you speak a little bit? It seems like when you expand the number of stakeholders, players in the project, how do you manage and I also assume a number of decision makers who are really kind of contributing, either saying yes, saying no. How do you manage when you come to a place? Can you speak to any places where you really had resistance, and how do you go around? I mean, it would seem like, at least judging from your presentation, that positivity kind of blasts through, hopefully, the most difficult problems. But can you?
Yeah, no, good question. So this is not like all kumbaya and puppy dogs and rainbows, right? There were certainly moments where I remember I was at an Anacostia Coordinating Council annual meeting. There were probably 150 people in there, and it was during a Q&A, and I was giving an update on the project, and I was just getting hammered by a local resident, right, who had deep, justifiable fears about the project. Like, again, who is this really for? Because every other time that big investment has come in the community, like, negative things have happened, or residents have to get moved out, right? And like, I was doing my best to try and respectfully listen and answer, right? And that does certainly happen. And after that meeting, a mentor of mine, a woman by the name of Oramenta Newsome, who ran the LISC DC office, they're a community development financial institution. Oramenta passed a few years ago. But Oramenta pulled me to the side and she said, Scott, sometimes you don't have to answer all those questions. Sometimes you just need to listen, right? And people need to be heard, right? And that was a really important lesson, right, for me. To the larger sort of the communal decision-making process, takes longer, right, for sure. But at the end of the day, we're convinced that it's going to be a better project, right? But not everyone always gets their way. Right? And I'll use a great example. We had our design oversight committee that were comprised of like the superintendent from the National Park Service, the chief planner at the US Navy Yard, local residents, right? The rowers, people that were often diametrically opposed. Like, you couldn't, there wasn't a kumbaya moment for everybody, but again, people were being heard, and that was really important. We had a really excellent facilitator throughout many, if not all of those meetings, and that was really critical, because I'm not smart enough to both participate and lead in those meetings, right? That's a very difficult thing. We worked with Don, who's he's out of the business, but is just one of the best facilitators in the Mid-Atlantic, and that's certainly helpful too. And even back to the design competition, there were some folks who didn't get everything they want, but again, I go back to that earlier comment, like, they were heard, right? They were listened to and done so respectfully, and that was really critical. Lastly, I'll say, early on in the project, and this is certainly helpful in the design field, I did go through and see who were the key stakeholders that I needed to have at the table, and that was really important. And a big one, just as one example, was the National Park Service, because where the park lands is Anacostia Park. It's celebrated its 100th anniversary a few years ago. NPS, love NPS, been going to national parks my entire life. And apologies if there's any National Park Service staff in here, but they're not always known as being the most warm and fuzzy collaborators that were out there. There's just a lot. It's the federal government, right? There's rules and regulations. So I remember going to Gopal Nijabal, who was the superintendent at the time, and the park was, the whole Park Service was gearing up for its 100th anniversary. And I read the entire call to action. It was their next 100-year strategies. And I say this not to be sneaky because I was transparent about it, but I read that whole document, read what their goals were, and as I was explaining this park, I used their language, and they were like, wow, Scott, that our call to action on page 47 says the exact same thing. It was like, I know because I've read it, right? And this is where it aligns. So they've been like our biggest ally, which is huge. And like, again, not speaking out of school, but it turns out NPS and DDOT do not have do not have the most constructive relationship, and so I was often the like kid of divorced parents of like, what I hear you saying is this, and multiple times I thought the project could have been killed. We were doing something called a transfer of jurisdictional authority, where the NPS is giving the city about 3 or 4 acres of land. That is not an easy thing to do, but because I'd built up that trust with the earliest superintendent and all of his team, that then later went on to the legal department, they knew they could trust me, right? And we could have these constructive conversations. So to sum up, I would say making sure that we have the environments where people can be heard, and you're building these like individual the relationships is really key. I'll end with we say internally that there's 42,000 people who live within a 1 mile area of the park, and we haven't talked to all 42,000 people yet, right? We're working on it, right? But we're out in the community as much as we can, like being visible. And lastly, I keep saying lastly, but it was really important as I was building my team that my team reflects the community that we're serving. So half of our staff still to this day are east of the river residents or grew up there, right? And that's really important because then we're practicing what we preach, right? The people who work at the park look like the people in the community that we're serving. But it's also really important when we're having those conference room discussions, when we're going through budgets or communications, right? You have people who grew up in the community that can help inform that process. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Thank you very much for coming to speak to us. This was honestly very inspiring, seeing how a project like this is so invested in the community and enriching the community. So my question is, you mentioned there are a few more that are maybe in the works for similar revitalization projects. Are you sort of waiting for cities to reach out to you, so you see what you've done here and reach out, or is it more community members, or are you guys actively searching for new places to work with?
Yeah, so there was a big, huge article in the New York Times 5-6 years ago. They were like 10,000 word, like big, huge article on the Bridge Park, and because of that, we were getting a lot of calls from people that usually go something like this: Scott, tell me the top 3 things I need to do to stop gentrification, right? And respectfully, I'm like, maybe I can reframe that question of how do you engage your local residents, right, to create strategies that are important to you and or to them. And what we found is that, and then I'll answer your question directly, but what we found is that while the strategies might be different in a St. Louis or LA or Buffalo, the process of engaging a local community and stakeholders, it's the process that's replicatable. So we've actually come up with a 7-step process of how to engage local residents, how to think about evaluation, how to build trust in early wins. We've got a bunch of videos up on our website, 5-6 minutes, like super short, that sort of share this. And it hit me though, I was up in Milwaukee, Rails to Trails had brought me up there to build out their own community preservation plan, and it was great. It's this amazing project along the 30th Street corridor, what once was the nation's most prosperous black neighborhood in the entire country. It's fallen on some tough times, but they're doing a Rails to Trails project that now they're in the process of building that out, which is great. But I was flying back and I was thinking, what about the communities that don't necessarily have the money to fly me up there and pay for my time and coordinate all this? So we approached the Kresge Foundation, that's been a big supporter of ours, and we launched last year our Building Strong Communities Technical Assistance Program. It's kind of a mouthful, but where we put out an open application process for communities to then reach out to us to apply, a very simple application. We actually just launched our 2nd cohort last week, and that's how we found those 5 projects that we're working with, all of which are, you need to have some sort of project in the works. It's some sort of various point of development. You need to make sure that we share the same values, right? This commitment to the community. And it's been remarkable. It's been remarkable to work with these very different communities, but that are making just such impactful change, like on the ground. This project, we're just about to release a little video documentary about this, about our work in Baltimore, working with Dr. Doris Terrell, who's 70-something years old, grew up in a neighborhood that's just gone through some really rough times in East Broadway, right in the shadow of Johns Hopkins, so this huge disparity of wealth. And she is transforming this like 4-acre, block-and-a-half long area that once was a school that was raised into a park, and then we're helping her develop a larger accompanying community preservation strategy. So in contrast, in Mississippi, we're working with Pastor Leach in a little tiny town in Columbus, Mississippi, 25,000 people, where they have a huge old abandoned creosote factory that's a brownfield site. It needs a ton of remediation, right? And you could look at that and think that Pastor Leach is just kind of tilting at windmills, right? But like, so were we like 10 years ago, right? So it provides that as part of this larger work, we go down, we lead community meetings, we're doing a big convening this summer. We're bringing all these folks to Washington, D.C. to learn from each other. And this year we're able to bring in some money to actually give some stipends to each of these communities, to pay for some food or that church basement or sort of whatever. So, yeah. If you go to, I think it's bridgepark.org/strongcommunities, I think is the website, that's the application process. So, yeah, sure. There's a question all the way, 2 questions all the way in the back.
Hi. First of all, I wanted to say congratulations on such a successful project. This is really exciting. As you had said, that this project has taken like 13 years, and I think that over those 13 years, you were able to really strengthen these relationships with the community. And I was wondering, for future projects, how are you going to kind of strike that balance between taking time to understand the community and build that relationship and form that trust, while also being able to get these parks and communities fast to help them? But obviously good things take time.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I so did not think this was going to be 13 years of my life. Like I thought we'd be running the park or I'd be doing whatever. And I don't think I'm going to be building another bridge park. Like I think this is good, right? They certainly sharing advice, but I think, there's that old proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go with others, right? And like, I don't necessarily need to think that you need 13 years, right? But it is going to take a little bit longer. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a much stronger project. Like one of those phone calls that I had where it was a community, I will not name, but they asked about the anti-displacement strategies, and I said, great, well, tell me a little bit about your project. And like, okay, well, we're doing our design competition, and we're going to have shovels in the ground in 6 months, and we're going to and I was like, well, tell me about your community involvement. You're like, yeah, well, the community is going to love it when we're done. And it was very clear that like the residents had not been engaged. And I was like, I know there needs to be this like patience and persistence to keep the eye on the prize of getting this. I'm going to say something that's very obvious. If we don't build the park, which we are, but if we don't build the park, like this is going to be one more failed promise to the community. So it's paramount. It's critically important that we fulfill that promise. But we needed to take that amount of time, again, maybe not 13 years, but like to engage the community as part of the way, right? And as part of that, there also needs to be some larger education where the community educating us and us educating the community. 5 years ago, we launched a program called our Community Leadership Empowerment Workshop, or CLEW, where it's 30 hours of training that we train local residents on the basics of urban planning, right? Because we noticed that the community often gets engaged when cranes are going up to build whatever it is, but we all know that when those cranes go up, like all those decisions were made a long time ago. So we brought in the head of Georgetown University's planning school to lead a big planning 101, and it's been amazing, right? Seeing these graduates who've quit their jobs, they've started new nonprofits, they've just done phenomenal work, but that's only because we've been able to have that amount of time to really sort of seed that work, which is really critical. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. Beautiful, amazing project. I know certainly I would have like to work on something like it. So that being said, do you see any opportunity for design students to maybe collaborate with firms in the future to kind of get some experience and get our hands on a project like that?
Yeah, we have had a ton of collaborations. We actually right at the, I'll look back and then I'll look forward. Right at the beginning, we worked with urban planning students at Virginia Tech, with Professor Elizabeth Morton, who we asked them to do a walkability study, as well as understanding the barriers, the physical barriers, to make sure that the park was deeply stitched into the commercial corridors nearby. And what these graduate students gave us was this consultant level where it was phenomenal. You should just be extraordinarily proud, right? These Virginia Tech students were just amazing. And we have done probably a dozen different collaborations with universities. We just worked with the Wagner School at NYU, who did a whole semester-long work on how do we support small businesses that are in the community, and they did sort of similar research of similar projects around the country that was phenomenal. So as we move forward, there are tons of opportunities of engaging with some of the art, engaging with programming, engaging with the businesses of running a park, right? The continued design of other elements for the park. How do we make sure, one of the things that we're sort of struggling with right now is, those freeways still exist there, but how do we soften you have to go sort of under a really hideous underpass to get to the, where the park's gonna be in the Anacostia River from historic Anacostia. Where might there be some design solutions? The freeway's not going away anytime soon, right? How do we think about the parcel next to where the Bridge Park is a 110-acre parcel that all of that will be transferred to the district in the near future. So how do we make sure that from a planning and design standpoint that the Bridge Park is connected to whatever happens there? And one idea is this 15-acre like European spa that might be coming in there, and whatever. So I'm rambling a little bit, but yes, that is my contact information. So please reach out. So I'd love to sit and brainstorm. Yeah. Any last questions? Oh, maybe one last question.
Thanks for keeping on this side of the room.
Come on, guys, you need to represent on that side of the room.
Yeah, so thank you for this project, and I think for already mentioned part of my question. So you mentioned a lot about community engagement. So I was wondering, what do you feel is like the most important thing when people implement community engagement?
Yeah, so what's the most important thing with community engagement? There is a difference between community outreach that sometimes is talked about and community engagement. And I would say outreach is more unidirectional, right? And engagement is much more like providing that opportunity, providing that space, providing that agency to have the community be making those decisions, right? So that's really important. I think it's as I said at the beginning of the presentation, it's removing those barriers, right? Like it's, not having a meeting at Tuesday at 2 o'clock, right? Because who can go to that meeting city staff can go to that meeting and they're all getting paid for it, but everyone else is at work, right? So how do we do programs in the evenings? How do we do programs on Saturday? How do we make sure if we're asking people to come on a Wednesday evening that there's pizza, there's food, right? That we're removing as many of those barriers as possible. I think that's really important. But it's also, there's this planning fatigue. These communities have been planned to death, right? People have just come in and without any visible sign of what happens to those ideas, right? So it's really important to connecting the dots where I can show up at a meeting and someone can say early on that they want an environmental education center, and then the next meeting I say, well, at the last meeting we heard somebody wanted an environmental education center, and people can be there and say, wait, that was my idea. They listened to me, right? And so it's making sure that we're acting upon those ideas, right? And this isn't just people are busy, people have lives. So it's if they're providing their very valuable time and expertise with us, then we need to make sure that we can demonstrate that we act on it. And sometimes that takes a minute, right? But for the community preservation plan, for instance, it was really important to make sure that we had some strategies that we could implement almost immediately. So we launched our first community preservation plan in December 2015. In February 2016, we launched our first home buyers club, right? Like within 2 months, right? We knew standing up a community land trust was going to take a minute, and it did. It took 2 years to stand up a separate 501c3, a separate nonprofit, train everybody. But having some of those really early wins so they can see the demonstrable, like the manifestation of their ideas was really critical. So, yeah. Well, a huge thank you to all of you. This was a real treat for me down here. I do mean it when I say, like, reach out with any other questions that you have. I'm also going to be around, I think, for a little while tonight too. And come up to DC when it's not having a blizzard, like it is right now. On May 16th for our River Festival, sometime over the summer when we get our groundbreaking, and certainly after we open in 2028, and walk with me over the bridge. So thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank